Distinguished participants, now let's start this webinar. I welcome you to this information session on the resumed second part of COP15, COP-MOP10 of the Cartagena Protocol and COP-MOP4 of the Nagoya Protocol. Today, I will be the moderator and at times presenter of this webinar. And I thank you all for taking the time to register for this webinar and to participate, to be here to participate in the webinar. To begin our deliberations, I now invite the Acting Executive Secretary, Mr. David Cooper, to deliver his welcoming remarks. David, the mic is yours.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I'm in Kinshasa and the connection is variable. I'd like to welcome you all to this webinar. As we're all aware, towards the end of our meetings in Montreal in December last year, the meeting of COP15, but also, of course, the 10th meeting of the parties to the Cartagena Protocol and the 4th meeting of the parties to the Nagoya Protocol, the meetings were suspended following some procedural hurdles when in fact we were trying to undertake elections, failed to have the quorum. Now, following some discussions in the Bureau and a decision that was made in the Bureau in July, the meetings are now scheduled, as you all know, to resume in Nairobi on the 19th and 20th of October. That is right after the SBSTTA meeting there. And we will then conclude the pending agenda items. That is, to complete the elections for the Bureau and for the chairs of SBSTTA and SBI, and also to formally adopt the reports of the meetings. Now, of course, in order for these agenda items to be concluded successfully, there are some important legal and procedural matters to be taken into account, and that's the topic of the webinar today. Specifically, a minimum number of 131 parties must be present and present with valid credentials in order to be able to take decisions on the remaining agenda items, including obviously the elections of officers. We can't proceed without this quorum. And therefore, let me take this opportunity to urge all parties that haven't already done so that credentials of delegation members or a note verbal indicating that the previous credentials are still valid. That is the credentials that were available in Montreal. The second important thing is that we're all clear on the application of the rules of procedure. Proceed smooth, and then they will be ready to answer any questions that you may have. So this webinar is meant to assist delegates to prepare adequately for the meetings. I encourage you to use this opportunity to participate so that we can all contribute to the successful completion of COP15 and the concurrent meetings of the protocols. I hope you find this webinar useful. And now I turn back to Worku. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, David, for these opening remarks and for setting the scene. We apologize for participants for the quality of the network. You might have missed a few words from David's opening remarks, but you might not miss at the end some of what he said. We might repeat it, and we will repeat it, especially, the focus of this webinar is the coming elections and what are the requirements for the coming elections. That's what he emphasized. And thank you so much, David. Distinguished participants, as mentioned by the acting executive secretary, there are few agenda items of the second part of COP15. COP15 that are pending consideration and conclusion by the resumed meetings in October. The chief among us, these is the election of officers expected, as you heard, expected to be held on 19 October. And therefore, the purpose of this webinar is to clarify some of the pertinent points with regard to these the elections. Let me show you what agenda items are going to be submitted or already submitted. We have already posted them for the resumed meetings. Yeah, I'm sharing. These are the agenda items in front of your screen. You see the agenda items that were not fully addressed or never addressed by the early hours of December 20, when we were trying to conclude the meetings. Of course, that was not possible because of some disagreements, and finally, for lack of quorum in order to conduct election of officers. So these are the agenda items, and the scope and purpose of today's webinar is to familiarize you to the what agenda items are remaining. And in fact, we are not even touching all the agenda items. We were simply emphasizing, we're simply focusing on election of officers. For COP15, it's agenda item 2A. For Cartagena Protocol, it's agenda item 2, and for Nagoya Protocol, it's agenda item 2 again. And for the two protocols, it's a matter of electing substitutes in the event the resumed second part of the meeting elects bureau members that are parties to the convention, but not parties to the protocol. So this is the scope of today's webinar discussion. We hope the information that we have planned, we are prepared to provide you, will assist in ensuring a smooth conduct of the elections of officers for the various offices in the CBD processes. Before we begin, I would like to provide you some logistical information on the use of our online meeting system. To request the floor, you may use the raise hand button in front of you. We'll give you the floor at the appropriate time. Please note, however, that you will be limited to microphone only. There will be no video. You can also use the question and answer feature to type in your question. In fact, we prefer that you type in your question as we go along, and we will try to respond to all of the questions that have come through this question and answer feature. All questions on the presentations will be answered, as I said, after the presentations have been delivered. In case you experience technical problems during the webinar, you may reach out to the Secretariat using the question and answer feature. I also want to provide some guidance to help us all make the most of the webinar. For the webinar to be as efficient as possible, I encourage you to be short and precise in your interventions. Avoid repeating comments or points made by others. Make comments only on the issues that are being discussed during this webinar. Be be patient and understand that we may face technical difficulties. The webinar will conclude as we have shared the program earlier. The webinar will conclude at 9 a.m. This morning. This is according to the Eastern Standard Time or Montreal time. But we might take a few more minutes depending on the circumstances, depending on the dynamics of the discussions. But we will not go beyond 30 minutes, beyond 9:30. It will be recorded and posted on the CBD website. All our discussions and the entire webinar will be recorded and posted on the website. We'll also share the presentations, so you do not have to really be distracted by taking notes. We will share all the presentations. Let's now move to the presentations, unless there is a question at this point from anyone. Okay. So the first presentation will be delivered by myself, and I have some slides for you, but I'm not going to deal with or to go into the details of all the slides. They are just there to provide you with more information. Otherwise, I will just focus on the directly relevant the PowerPoints, the slides that we have, where we have identified some elements that are relevant to election of officers. Now I will share my screen with my presentation. I hope I shared my screen now. Do you see them? Yeah. Okay. Full screen. Full screen. Yes. Yes. Sorry about that. It took us a while to share the screen. So you have on this on my presentation, I have tried to touch upon the institutional framework that needs, what are the bodies that needed the election of officers, or that needed presiding officers, essentially, to these bodies. We have the governing bodies of the COP, we have the governing bodies of the two MOPs, and then, of course, the Bureau is one of the most important bodies that we have, where we needed elections. And at the resumed second part of these meetings, COP15, we will be prepared to elect the new Bureau members. Then, of course, there are subsidiary bodies. Some of the subsidiary bodies are open-ended subsidiary bodies, such as SBSTTA, such as SBI, the Working Group on 8J, and these also need, they have their own offices. SBSTTA has its own chair, subsidiary body on implementation as one. Working Group on 8J is always under the COP, and therefore it's the presidency which facilitates deliberations in Working Group on 8J. The president we have in the Bureau, this is how the Bureau looks like. This is what the terms of office of the president is. It's from, it starts at the beginning of an ordinary COP, and it ends at the beginning of the next ordinary COP. While the vice president's or the other Bureau members' term of office starts at the end of the an ordinary COP, and then their term ends at the end of the next ordinary COP. It's not that important. The Bureau has different functions. And I brought up these, in fact, so that you can see the functions of the Bureau in terms of providing guidance to the Secretariat, in terms of making consultations with their constituents, and one important function that they have is examining credentials and submitting a report to the COP and to the COP MOPs. There is a rotation in the Office of Presidency that you have, those of you who are parties may know that this rotation, regional rotation, has been set up at COP13, and it will be activated from COP17. This is what we call the situation in terms of quorum for governing bodies. You need 1/3 to start the meeting, and you need 2/3 of the parties to present, to be at the meeting in order to take a decision. That's why last time in December, the last second part of the meeting, we lacked quorum because election, when they are taken, are considered decisions. And therefore, we were in a decision-taking process that needed the presence of 2/3 of the parties at that meeting, but we didn't have at that time. And the subsidiary bodies, yeah, you can see, you will have this and see what the differences are in terms of quorum for opening the meeting and decision-taking. Voting, when we go for decision-taking, and if that decision-taking involves voting for matters of procedure, if the COP is taking a decision on matters of procedure, and if that involves voting, then the majority vote of the parties present and voting. This is a technical term used in the rules of procedure. Parties present and voting is necessary for anything to pass with regard to procedural matters. But as you know, consensus is the default in terms of taking decision for matters of substance. Then this is the most pertinent slide. Sorry, yeah, there being some technical. Okay. Oh, yes. Sorry, it was not full screen. Okay. So, yeah, this is an important information. In this table, we've tried to put together some information regarding to the different offices, what the term of office is, who nominates members of this office, and who makes the election, who makes the election. So we have, for example, presidency. It's from the beginning of COP, as I said earlier. Nomination is the host country, as a matter of customary practice. It is the host country which nominates which nominates the outgoing, sorry, it's not the host country, the outgoing presidency, which nominates the next presidency. And this is in accordance, and the rule that is pertinent in the rules of procedure is Rule 21 on presidency, rapporteur, and other bureau members. We have, for example, here bureau vice presidents. We mean vice presidents. So their term of office, as I said earlier, starts at the closure of a COP meeting that elected them, that they served to the closure of the next COP meeting. And there are, this is in accordance with the applicable rules. There is an office of a substat chair, and who nominates the substat chair? A region exercising its turn. This is indicated in the modus operandi of substa, and the election of a substat chair is made by the COP. SBI chair is similar. Here in the third column, you see nomination. This thing is simply practice. Who nominates is simply a practice. Otherwise, the rules of procedure talks in terms of regional rotation or something to that effect. Otherwise, it doesn't explicitly provide a role for the regions to make nominations. What we have in the rules of procedure is how the vice presidents are elected, who elects them, the COP, how the SBI chair is elected or the substat chair is elected, and who elects them? It is the COP. This is an important distinction that you may wish to really take into account when you go for election next time and beyond. The regions are there just to facilitate in identifying the candidates. Otherwise, the final election has to be made by the COP, and the COP will not be limited by anything, including by the identification of the candidate at region level. Will not be something that binds the COP. It is the COP which finally makes the election, the power, the authority to elect the chair, to elect the bureau members, the substat chair, the SBI chair rests with the COP. This is an important distinction that you need to emphasize and you need to take into account. That is my presentation, but my colleague Inonge will take you to the nitty-gritty, to the really specific rules, the rules that are specific to elections, the rules and practices that are important that are required to conduct in the conduct of elections of different officers for different offices. Thank you so much. Yes.
Greetings to all the participants, and thank you, Weko. So my presentation, as Weko said, is mostly going to be on the actual rules and the process regarding elections. So the most important rule, or let me say the rule that you should look at first when you look at elections, is Rule 49 of the Rules of Procedure. So this rule says all elections shall be held by secret ballot unless otherwise decided by the Conference of the Parties. So this rule refers to the method of voting. The first part refers to voting by secret ballot. And then the second part that says, unless otherwise decided by the Conference of the Parties, refers to consensus or acclamation. So what is acclamation? So usually acclamation or consensus occurs where the number of nominees equals number of seats available and where there's no objection to the candidacy of the nominee. So this has been the long-standing practice in CBD processes. So in the absence of consensus on nominees, elections will, of course, be held by secret ballot. But even where there's consensus on a nominee, a party can request for elections by secret ballot. So one of the most important things for elections is that you need to establish a quorum to take decisions. So under the rules of procedure, for the COP and COP-MOPs, it's 2/3 of the parties. And we know that there are 196 parties to the convention. So 2/4 is 131. So that is provided for under Rule 30. And those parties should have valid credentials. So for subsidiary bodies, the applicable rule in terms of the quorum to take decisions is Rule 26(5)(a). So a majority of the parties for a limited body is 98. That's the quorum. And then for an open-ended body, it's a quarter of the parties, which is 49. So for the subsidiary bodies, no credentials are required, just formal registration. So I think it is important to know what the voting rights. Of course, under Rule 39(1), each party shall have one vote. And then the exception is the regional economic integration organizations. So where the member states exercise their rights to vote, the regional economic body cannot exercise its right to vote and vice versa. So that is clarified under Rule 39(2). So we have an example of the European Union there. So what is the majority threshold for votes? So we have rules 50 and 51. So a majority of the votes cast by the parties present and voting. And then Rule 45 defines what parties present and voting means. So this is where parties present at the session at which voting takes place and casting a vote in the affirmative or in the negative. So in this regard, parties abstaining from voting shall be considered as not voting. So Rule 45 is very clear on that. So briefly, we can look at how the ballot paper is completed. Ballot papers must be filled in correctly by party representatives, otherwise they'll be declared invalid. For example, where more candidates than the number of seats are ticked. And of course, notations other than a tick for a candidate will be disregarded. So in terms of completing the ballot paper, of course, if a mistake is made in the process of ticking the boxes, a new ballot paper is issued and the old one is destroyed. Only use the ballot papers provided. Briefly on casting of ballots, we have a cardinal rule, which is Rule 48. it says that no representative shall interrupt the voting except on a point of order in connection with the actual conduct of the voting. So once the chairperson or the presiding officer says voting has begun, then there should be no interruption except as provided. So there are two main systems of voting. It depends on what the meeting decides or what the presiding officer proposes. So ballots are either cast from the delegate seats or from the front of the room. One important item also is that there should be tellers to monitor the elections, count and certify the results assisted by the Secretariat. So these tellers are going to be chosen from parties. So in terms of the practice would be that the tellers would not be from a regional group where there are more candidates than the available number of seats, or from a party whose representative is on the ballot paper. So this relates to issues of transparency. So in terms of counting of ballots and results, briefly, the presiding officer will adjourn the meeting for the counting of the ballots by the tellers and will resume to announce the results. So we have, I think I already mentioned rules 50 and 51. So in terms of majority, the candidates that have received the largest number of votes and a simple majority of the parties present and voting will be declared elected. So rules 50 and 51 also provide for scenarios where the required number of candidates do not obtain the majority in the first ballot. I will not go into those rules. They are quite extensive, but they do provide very comprehensive information on what happens when there's a tie or when the number of candidates is not reached in the first ballot. Yeah, so these are the rules, Rule 50 and Rule 51. So you can have a look at them at your own time, or we can answer any questions later in terms of the rules. With that, I would like to thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Inonge, for that presentation. Just on one slide, there's some correction that we need to make. When Inonge was talking about the quorum required for decision taking in a limited body, there is a number that you saw, 98. That is for the open-ended, actually. Limited number could be 25. So out of 25, the majority would be like 13. If the limited number is a body that is not open-ended, a body that constitutes a limited number of participants, designated participants. So just I would like to make that correction. Otherwise, it's now your turn to make any comments, to raise any questions within the scope that we really provided. We saw some of the questions that came earlier, and you know, a number of them were probably outside of the scope of this webinar or the intended scope of this webinar. We do not deal with any substantive item, either on DSI or anything on the global biodiversity framework. That's not the intention of this webinar, really. The intention of this webinar is just to introduce to you the remaining agenda items, the agenda items that remained in by the last day of December, that were addressed not in a complete manner, or they were never addressed. So those are the agenda items that are going to be tabled. And among those agenda items, the webinar's purpose is, in fact, to focus on elections and the techniques of elections, because in the CBD processes, you all might appreciate that we have never had elections, and that's why in December, and that December 19th evening and the early hours of December 20, we had all that the very complicated process, a very complicated time. The elections were something new to this process, and probably, yeah, we need to start learning. They may probably stay with us, or they may go away. But for now, we need to familiarize ourselves with what the rules are saying in terms of election, and what the practice is in other MEAs, in the United Nations processes, etc. So I will stop here, and I will give the floor now to you for any comments, or if questions have already come. Okay, yeah. My colleagues are telling me that there are questions that came already through the Q&A feature. So, yeah. Yeah, we've got few questions, a bunch of questions actually. So I will try to respond very briefly to each one of them. Can SCBD confirm the parties had not raised any issues in Montreal under other matters? The answer is no. Yes, they had not raised any issues in Montreal under other matters. Other matters was not, as an agenda item, was not considered in the December meeting last year. The next question is, yeah, it's yeah, we will share, of course, the presentations. It's a comment, please share. What is the current status of valid credentials? That's a good question. This is what really makes us lose our sleep every day. I always wake up and look at my inbox to see how many countries have submitted their valid credential or have submitted not verbal, confirming that the validity of the credentials submitted in December for the December meetings remain valid. So we don't have a big number, but we can give that number, including what we have received this morning. Not verbal, yes, we are getting as well a good number of not verbals, but still still we need really the parties' cooperation, and probably our bureau members need to do more in pushing their constituencies, their members, to submit these important documents, either not verbal or credential, as early as they can. Does the CBD contact parties well in advance? Yes, that's what we do every day. my colleagues do make contact with different parties, asking them, reminding them. In fact, we go sometimes to the extent of sharing an information that your country has submitted credential for the December meetings. So can you work on getting us or the issuance of not verbal for some of the participants, for some of the delegates who participated in the December meetings? These are the kind of interventions, these are the kind of efforts that we are making at secretariat level, but we will keep on doing that. And at one point, we need to probably, under the guidance of the Bureau, we need to make a decision whether we can project that we will get the required minimum quorum, or probably the projection could show that that is not something which would be possible, and therefore we're not going to see another lack of, after gathering in Nairobi, we conclude that no, we don't have the quorum, and therefore another suspension. This is not something that we envisage. Either we have the meeting or we don't, the meetings, or we don't have the meetings. So we are working on a daily basis, on an hourly basis, actually. Which parties will be the tailors? That is, that's going to be determined through the Bureau, through consultations. But at least the criteria, as my colleague Inonge has indicated to you, tailors should be outside of those regions where there is no competitive election, or where there is no nominee who participates in a competitive election, meaning an election through a secret ballot. Otherwise, we don't really know the specific tailors who would be identified and proposed by the finally by the presidency at the meeting, at the beginning of the meeting, if the meeting happens, shall I add, but it will happen probably with your help. Yes, in the not verbal, the purpose of the not verbal. Not verbals are, instead of asking you to get new credentials, we are giving you the option to get an authoritative diplomatic communication, which is a not verbal, which confirms that the credentials that your country has submitted for XYZ for the December meetings remain valid for the purpose of the resumed meetings. That is the kind of message that we want to see in the not verbal, and a number of parties have done so, have submitted not verbal, confirming to us that the December credentials for the delegates, for the designated delegates, remain valid. So that's it. Due to Turkey's cancellation of hosting next COP, does this affect any decisions for this meeting? No, it has nothing to do with the next meeting. But of course, the next meeting could probably consider this matter about the host of the next meeting, but it will not affect any decision that the resumed meetings are going to make. Did any party request that a matter be treated under other matters? The answer would be no. There is no indication that we get from any party for any matter to be considered in the context of the agenda item other matters. We have not received that. What needs to happen during SBSTA meeting in Kenya? Kindly explain what needs to happen during the SBSTA meeting in Kenya. Well, this is just like any other SBSTA, and it has its own agenda items, and it will consider its agenda items and make recommendations where appropriate and close. But of course, there is election of officers agenda item, as always, for SBSTA 25. And there are bureau members who are expected to leave their membership because their term has ended, and they need to be replaced. And that replacement will happen through election. And we hope that the election will go on smoothly. We do not anticipate any difficulties in identifying the replacements for the outgoing bureau members, who are in number 5. It is one bureau member from the 5 from each of the 5 regions. So we need to identify these replacements, and and then SBSTA will elect them. There is this question, a difficult one. Does the EU always get 27 votes, or only the number of EU members actually present at the meeting with valid credentials? I would say that yes, members should actually be present and should have valid credentials, so that the authority of the EU could fully, if it is the authority of the EU, for example, to vote or to take the decision on behalf of its member states, then that authority will become full only when the members, the constituting members, are actually present at the meeting with valid credentials. That will be my answer at this stage. Of course, EU, if the authority rests with the EU to take any decision, it will have a vote of equal to the number of its member states. There is one more question just came under item 2A, election of officers. The COP will examine this item from the beginning, calling from the representative from the regions to make their nominations. And if there is consensus, there will be no election. A country will need to oppose to consensus and request an election to take place. Correct? Correct. I will stop there. But yeah, we wish if something like this won't happen. But yes. You can raise your hand to make comments or present or submit any more questions. Otherwise, I think I have gone through all the questions that came through Q&A. Yes, I see a hand being raised. Simon, I think you have the floor.
Yes, my question had to do with the presentation about secret ballot. I understand that for the votes of the Bureau, it's always secret ballot, but then the presenter, she mentioned that a secret ballot could be called for, and I wasn't sure under what conditions. Does it just take one party to ask for a secret ballot, or is there some minimum that is needed for a secret ballot? What do the rules say about that?
Yes. The rule says that elections are conducted through a secret ballot unless the COP decides otherwise. So far, the COP was deciding otherwise, and all elections were conducted through acclamation. There was no secret ballot voting. But now, because of what happened in December last year, elections should be conducted through a secret ballot. There are two different approaches that we see around other MEAs, around other UN processes, namely either all the candidates, even if, for example, region, Africa region, GRULAC, and any other region submit candidates which are if there are 2 seats, for example, in the case of the Bureau, we have 2 seats, and Africa, GRULAC, Asia, they nominate 2 people, and there's some kind of a consensus at the regional level, and we assume that there will be no opposition at the plenary level. But there are 1 or more regions where the number of candidates could be more than the number of seats. So in some of the MEA's cases, the approach is to put all the candidates in a ballot. Even if there are only 2 candidates, there is no competition required, but in order to give opposition, anybody who might have some reservation or opposition to any of the candidates from other regions, they will put them in a ballot. In other cases where the number of candidates is equal to the number of seats, they will go ahead and ask the body to elect them by acclamation. In our case, there was a discussion in the Bureau, and the final decision was that we will put all the candidates from all the regions in a ballot paper, and we ask the body to make election. Am I clear? Simon?
Yes, thank you for that. Just a follow-up question, if possible, please. I just wanted to understand also about the actual method of choosing the names. Is it just going to be around if one, for example, if there are more than one candidate, does the person with the most votes automatically win, or is there go a second round if there's no majority, or has the actual method been chosen?
Yeah, there are rules in the rules of procedure. My colleague Inonge just indicated slightly on those rules, Rule 50 and 51, where we have the candidate that would be elected is the candidate with the largest number and with the majority, and the one who gets the majority of the votes of the parties present and voting. This is very important. The parties, majority of parties present and voting. We are not saying the rule. It doesn't say the majority of the parties. It doesn't stop there. The majority of parties present and voting. Majority of parties present and voting has a definition in the rules of procedure, which is the number of parties present and voting means those parties who are actively voting by, indicating their choice of a candidate or by saying yes or no. Those parties who are abstaining, they are not counted. So parties present and voting is determined on the basis of the number of parties who are actively engaged in the election process. And yeah, This is, if you look at the rules of procedure, Rule 50, Rule 51, when there is less, when there is a tie, when there is less number, etc. There are rules to follow, and we will apply those rules in the event this happens. Simon?
Well, that's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's a question that just came. Yeah. David, I'll give you the floor. I will give the floor to the acting executive secretary after I say this. There's the question that came. Can you provide an example which UN body rules of procedure had the same provision on secret ballots, particularly that election is held by secret ballot unless otherwise decided, so that we understand the analogy? Well, I think UNIA has the same thing. Other MEAs also have the same rules. They might have some more elaboration. Otherwise, the basic rule which says elections are conducted through a secret ballot unless decided otherwise by the body which takes the decision, which makes decisions. It's everywhere in, as I said, UNIA and other MES as well. That would be my answer. Did SCBD receive already confirmation of all candidates for vice officers? Any different compared to the nominations put forward? That's a good question. Yeah, this week and half of last week, I was chasing this confirmation or reconfirmation of candidates, and we have so far received a confirmation from Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean, from WIOG, part of CEE, let me put it that way, and nothing has changed really. They just reconfirmed what they have announced as a candidate for Bureau membership. Yes. Yes, just my colleague is showing me that the UNIA rule, it says Rule 56, all elections shall be held by secret ballot unless otherwise decided by the United Nations Environment Assembly. As I said, yes. Yes. Yeah, I was muted. Sorry about that. When I was talking about this UNIA rule, it's Rule 56. This is as a supplementary answer to the question, what other UN offices have this rule of secret ballot unless decided otherwise. As I said, I mentioned UNIA, and in fact, the specific rule in the rules of procedure of UNIA is Rule 56, which reads, all elections shall be held by secret ballot unless otherwise decided by the United Nations Environment Assembly. Yeah, sorry, I was on mute talking all that. So now let me give the, before that, shall I give the floor to to Scott. I saw a hand raised by Scott. Scott, you may go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so I know it's a late hour. I just wanted to quickly follow up on my on Simon's question, which I thought was a very good question. And I thought maybe we can get clarity. My understanding of the question was, does once ballots supposedly, with the right quorum, the right number of ballots being presented, the results of that election, does a candidate win? Do they need to get the majority of the votes, or is it the candidate that gets the most votes?
According to the rules, it's the candidates, the majority votes of parties present and voting, and the largest number. Both are mentioned. The candidate that have obtained the largest number of votes, and then the candidate with the majority votes, the largest number of votes shall be taken if, yeah. Sorry. Yes, for the final election, there are steps. For the final election, we need both. According to Rule 51, the candidates should get the largest number of votes and a majority of the votes cast by the parties present and voting. That's when we shall deem, or the tellers shall deem the candidate elected. Am I clear, Scott? Rule 51 is when we have 2 or more elective places are to be filled at one time under the same conditions. Those candidates not exceeding the number of such places, obtaining in the first ballot the largest number of votes and a majority of the votes cast by the parties present and voting shall be deemed elected. So it's not only the largest votes, but also the majority of votes.
So, and I'm sorry to...
The majority of votes of parties present and voting. Yeah, so that's good. Sorry. Go ahead, Scott.
Quick follow-up then. If there were, let's say, more than 2 candidates, we might need additional rounds of votes. We might need a runoff election.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, we will take the largest votes in that case, and then a run of votes. But in the end, the run of votes should give us, or if it gives us the largest votes and the majority of the votes by parties present and voting, then that's when the assumption, the election, the winning of the candidates will be concluded, will be determined, so to say. Thank you. All right. Any other question? Otherwise, I will now give the floor to David, the Acting Executive Secretary. David, please go ahead.
Thanks so much, Worker, and thanks to you and Inonge for the presentations, and thanks to everyone participating in this webinar. I really just wanted to emphasize that I think following the decision of the Bureau to go ahead, and following the fact that we did receive confirmation from now I think more than 140 parties that they intend to participate and intend to provide credentials. Of course, we are determined that we should go ahead and that we should get indeed those numbers of credentials. And as Worker indicated, he and his team are working every day to try and chase countries as necessary. But I would just like to reiterate our call to you all to please, if you haven't already provided either the credentials or a note verbal indicating the validity of existing credentials, please do so as soon as possible. The sooner that can be done, the more that it reduces uncertainty for everyone, and the more that we can be sure that we're going to have be able to actually have the elections and go ahead. And of course, it's also important that we're all on the same page in understanding the rules of procedure. I hope that this session has helped in that direction. Of course, we will, as already announced, hold a briefing a day or two before the elections in Nairobi itself. So that would be during the SBSTTA meeting just before, so that delegates on the ground can also be confident of the processes going forward. With that, just to thank you all for participating in this webinar. We look forward to seeing you in Nairobi with your credentials, having sent us advance copies so that we can be sure and we can plan accordingly. Thanks very much to everyone. Woko, I think you're muted again.
Thank you so much, David. Yeah, that's a very important point to make, really, and coming from you, how important this resumed second part of the meetings is. It cannot be really overemphasized. We have to make it, and we have to succeed. And in order to succeed, of course, we need each one of yours cooperation in terms of getting the quorum, and in terms of understanding the process, especially when it comes to the election and the remaining items. As you have seen, they do not really need anything extraordinary than we are doing in our previous meetings, in all our meetings. So this time the elections should happen, and they would happen only if you are really supporting us, and a number of parties are really supporting us. As I said, we didn't give you a specific number yet, because we have to share whatever number we have in terms of credential, in terms of not verbal. We have to share it with our bureau before we share it with anyone. So we're not giving you that specific number at this stage, but we are working on a daily basis, and please help us. And with this, I think we are coming to the end of our briefing session. As David has said, there will be another briefing session, in fact, with more understanding of the situation, with more information and in our hands. We will have another briefing session just before the opening of the resumed meetings in Nairobi. Otherwise, that will be it for today, and thank you all for your insightful questions and comments. The deliberations today have provided us with critical inputs into the various legal and procedural issues that are relevant to the success of the resumed meetings next month. We encourage you to send us any additional queries you may have to the Secretariat. We will do our best to provide responses. We are really learning this new territory, as you are also doing the same. We'll try to provide you our response as soon as we can amidst the preparations of the meetings. And by the way, we are also we are working on an information document which more or less puts the information that we try to provide you today together, and so that you can have more information at hand in terms of the elections. This is going to be an information document which details the rules of procedure, the applicable rules of procedure on the one hand, and the balloting process on the other. We will also be available on site, as I said, in Nairobi before and during the resumed meetings to provide any necessary clarifications. Depending on the meeting schedule, the Secretariat will also provide further briefing. It's already mentioned. Secretariat encourages representatives of parties. We would like to say this repeatedly, really, the representative of parties to take part in the resumed meetings, and for that purpose submit valid credentials or a not verbal. Really, this is a simplified procedure that we in consultation with the Bureau have put in place for you, so that you don't really go after, after a foreign minister or a prime minister or a head of state to issue another credential. If you have already credential for the December meetings, what we need is simply a diplomatic communication in the form of not verbal, confirming that the credentials validity remain for the resumed meetings purposes. Notifications with more details have been issued, and we are ready to, it's almost time for us to issue another notification, which is a reminder of the same thing. We will issue that in the next few days. Otherwise, yeah, I would simply say in the name of on my behalf, as well as on behalf of my colleagues here, Inonge, and the colleagues here who are supporting us, thank you for being here, and for having this exchange, this first round of exchange, and we hope that we will have more, as I said, on site in Nairobi. And with this, the webinar is closed. Thank you so much.